What would you do if your inheritance wasn't an asset, but an insult? After her husband passed away, all this woman inherited was a single, abandoned piece of land. In that moment, her daughter-in-law burst out laughing, declaring that she only deserved something so worthless, something worth just 1 peso. Still grieving the loss of her husband, she was forced to face the reality that her entire life's work had become a joke to her own children, who silently agreed with the mockery. Follow this story to see what she does next by subscribing to our channel, Deepu Khatter Stories, hitting the like button, and leaving a comment to let us know which city you're watching from. When your own family puts such a cheap price on your worth, do you accept your fate, or do you stand up and prove what you're truly made of? The reading. My name is Beatrice Holloway. Most folks just call me B. I am 62 years old, a retired history teacher. I used to think that if I raised my children right, I could leave this world with no regrets. But then came the day I learned some things, no matter how freely you give them, are never returned. The air in Mr. Finch's office was heavy, thick with the smell of old books and unspoken grief. It had been a week since we buried Samuel, but the silence he left behind was still as loud as a ringing in my ears. I sat in a worn leather chair, the kind that sighs when you settle into it. My children sat across from me. David, my firstborn, all sharp suit and nervous energy. Lena, my artist, her hands twisting a loose thread on her black dress. And Michael, my youngest, looking lost and tired, the way single fathers often do. Alistair Finch, our lawyer and Samuel's friend for 40 years, cleared his throat. He put on his reading glasses. The rustle of the thick paper was the only sound in the room. To my children, he began, his voice steady. David, Lena, and Michael, I leave the house on Sycamore Street and the entirety of my retirement savings, to be divided equally among you. I felt a small, strange relief. It was right. They were young. They had lives to build, children to raise. I had my memories. That was enough. Alistair continued. And, to my beloved wife, Beatrice, I held my breath, not out of anticipation, but out of a quiet respect for Samuel's final word. I leave $1 praptic. Silence. It was not a shocked silence. It was a cold, heavy silence. I looked at my children. David stared at the polished surface of the table. Lena's gaze was fixed on the window. Michael just looked down at his hands. No one looked at me. And, Mr. Finch added, pushing on, I also leave her the sole stewardship of the property known as the Black Creek parcel. That's when it happened. A sound. Sharp. Unforgiving. It was a laugh. Charlotte, David's wife, had tried to stifle it with her hand, but it escaped anyway. A brittle little sound, like a piece of glass breaking. She leaned toward my son, her whisper, loud enough for the whole room to hear. See, I told you not to worry, she said. Your father was a practical man. He knew what everyone was worth. Your mother gets an abandoned piece of land worth about 1 peso. 1 peso, the word hung in the air. A foreign coin. A cheap insult. I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me. To defend his father's memory. He just shifted in his seat. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Lena drew in a sharp breath but said nothing. Michael seemed to shrink even smaller in his chair. Their silence was the real inheritance. Mr. Finch closed the folder with a soft, final thud. The meeting was over. My children stood up. They came over to me, one by one, and gave me the kind of awkward, stiff hug you give a distant relative. Their touches were light, perfunctory, like they were afraid the grief, or maybe the poverty, was contagious. Then they left. David walked out with Charlotte, his arm around her. Lena and Michael followed, their heads down. I just sat there, in the sighing leather chair. Mr. Finch took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked old. He looked tired. B, he said, his voice soft. There's more to it than that. Samuel had a plan. But I wasn't listening. Not really. I was still hearing that laugh, still feeling the weight of that silence. In that room, surrounded by my husband's legacy, I had never felt more alone. I was a 62-year-old woman, a mother of 3, and I had just learned what I was worth, $1 and an abandoned piece of land. The secret of Black Creek. The days that followed were quiet. A heavy, suffocating kind of quiet. The house on Sycamore Street, the one Samuel and I had filled with laughter and arguments and the smell of baking bread for 40 years, no longer felt like mine. It belonged to the children now. I walked through the rooms like a ghost, my hand trailing over the familiar curve of a chair, the cool surface of the kitchen counter. Everything was the same, but everything had changed. I saw the future stretching out before me, a series of quiet, lonely days. Me, the woman with $1 to her name. On the third day, a Thursday, Alistair Finch's old sedan pulled into the driveway. I watched him from the kitchen window as he walked up the path. His shoulders slumped a little, a worn briefcase in his hand. He looked like a man carrying someone else's burden. I let him in and made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my children had learned to read, where Samuel and I had planned our lives. For a long time, we just sat there, listening to the drip of the coffee maker. "How are you holding up, B?" he finally asked. His voice was gentle. I shrugged, turning my empty mug in my hands. "I'm breathing. Alistair. I suppose that's something." He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I came because the meeting the other day didn't end properly. There are things you need to know. Things Samuel wanted me to tell you, but only when you were alone." I looked at him, a flicker of curiosity cutting through the fog of my grief. Alone. I was certainly that. He opened his briefcase and took out a thick folder. It wasn't the will. It was something else. It was full of maps and deeds and yellowed legal documents. He spread them out on the table. They covered the floral pattern of the tablecloth completely. "The Black Creek parcel," he said, tapping a large map. "The children, they think it's worthless. Everyone does. That's what Samuel wanted them to think." He pointed to the lines and shaded areas on the map. "For the last 20 years, B, Samuel has been doing something. Quietly. Every time a neighbor fell on hard times, every time a piece of land went up for sale, he didn't buy the land. He bought the water." I stared at him, confused. The water rights," Alistair clarified. "In Texas, you can own the land, but someone else can own the rights to the water underneath it." He bought up the rights from every adjacent property, piece by piece. He legally attached them all to the Black Creek parcel. He created a fortress of water, B. The entire aquifer under this valley, the rights to it belonged to that worthless piece of land. I looked from the maps to his face. My mind was trying to catch up. The years of scrimping and saving, the times I'd wondered where the money went, it wasn't bad investments. It was this. "Samuel, you did all this and you never said a word. Why?" I whispered. "Why would he keep it a secret?" Alistair looked at me, his eyes full of a sad understanding. He saw the way the world was changing. Bia. He saw the big corporations moving in. He used to say, "One day, water is going to be more valuable than oil." He was protecting it. "For you." He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a single, sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in Samuel's familiar, steady hand. "He left this for you, too," Alistair said. My hands trembled as I took it. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was crisp. There was only one sentence. "My dearest Bia, trust the land. It will take care of you, the way you always took care of me." I read it once, then twice. The words blurred through my tears. It wasn't a business plan. It was a love letter. After Alistair left, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time. I looked past my garden, past the neat lawns of my neighbors, toward the hazy outline of the hills where the Black Creek parcel lay. That dry, rocky, useless piece of ground, but for the first time, I wasn't seeing a patch of dirt. I was seeing 20 years of my husband's silent devotion. I was seeing his foresight, his protection. I was seeing a promise. The first move. Hope is a strange and stubborn thing. A weed that pushes up through the cracks in a concrete sidewalk. When I saw David's car pull into the driveway 2 days later, that little weed of hope started to grow in my chest. He was alone. Charlotte wasn't with him. Maybe, I thought, he's come to talk, to apologize. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood on the porch, holding a large, glossy folder. He looked uncomfortable. "Mom," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Can I come in? We need to talk." My hope grew a little taller. "Of course, baby. Come on in. I'll make some tea." He followed me into the kitchen and sat at the table, right in the same spot Alistair had sat. But he didn't bring comfort. He brought that shiny folder. He opened it and spread the documents out, just like Alistair had. But these weren't old maps. They were new. Architectural drawings. Brightly colored charts. "Mom, I've been talking with Charlotte's father," he began, his voice taking on a rehearsed, professional tone. "We've been running the numbers on the Black Creek parcel. It's an incredible opportunity." My heart sank. This wasn't an apology. It was a sales pitch. He pushed a drawing toward me. It showed a sprawling golf course, green and perfect, with a large clubhouse and rows of luxury houses. "Sterling Holdings wants to develop the land. Mom, they want to build a resort. It'll create jobs. It'll be good for the whole community." I looked at the drawing. A golf course. All that water Samuel had saved. All those years of silent planning, just to keep a lawn green for rich men to play on, and, David said, leaning forward, they're prepared to make a very generous offer. For the family, he tapped a number on a spreadsheet, $5 million. The number was so big, it didn't even seem real. "This is for our future, Mom," he said. "For Lena and Michael. For your grandchildren. Think of what we could do with this. We'd never have to worry about money again." I looked at my son, my firstborn, the boy I had taught to share his toys, to be kind to others. He was trying to sell me a future that would erase his father's past. I took a slow sip of my tea. It had gone cold. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed on the table between us with a solid thud. David stared at me. He blinked. "No, what do you mean?" "No. I mean no, David," I repeated, my voice a little stronger now. "The answer is no. Your father didn't spend his life protecting that water just so it could be used to water a golf course." His face hardened. The sun disappeared, and the real estate broker took his place. "Mom, you're not being practical. This is business. You can't let sentiment get in the way of a $5 million deal. It's not sentiment, David. It's respect. It's his legacy." Just then, the front door opened. It was Charlotte. She must have been waiting in the car. She walked into the kitchen, a bright, false smile on her face. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Looking from my face to David's, she said no. David said, his voice flat. Charlotte's smile vanished. It didn't fade. It just switched off. "You can't do that," she said, her voice sharp. "You don't have the right to make that decision alone. That's our family's legacy too. Our children's legacy. Your father-in-law entrusted it to me." "Charlotte," I said, keeping my voice calm. The calm of a teacher dealing with a difficult child, that was a mistake. Her face flushed with anger. "Don't you talk down to me, you're just a stubborn old woman who's standing in the way of progress." She grabbed David's arm. "Let's go, David. We don't have to sit here and listen to this." He hesitated for a second. Just a second. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of the little boy he used to be. A boy who would have been horrified by all of this. But the flicker died out. He stood up and followed his wife to the door. At the doorway, he turned back. His voice was cold. "Unfamiliar. You're going to regret this, Mom." Charlotte's father doesn't give up easily. Then they were gone. The front door clicked shut. I stood there, looking at the door they had just walked through. I knew I was completely alone now, but something inside me had changed. The part of me that had felt so broken, so small, was gone. In its place, something hard and clear was beginning to form. I was not going to back down. Have you ever had to stand up to the very people you love most in the world? Please, share your story in the comments below. I need to know I'm not the only one. The test. The letters started arriving a week after David and Charlotte's visit. Thick cream envelopes with the Sterling Holdings logo embossed in gold at the top. They were not friendly letters. They were filled with words like legal recourse and fiduciary duty and eminent domain. Words designed to make a person feel small and tired. And I was tired. So deeply tired. Most days, I'd sit at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd help my children with their homework, and I'd just stare at the piles of paper. Each letter was a battle I didn't know how to fight. Each sentence was a front I had to defend alone. The silence in the house was no longer just sad. It was heavy. It pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. Sometimes, I'd catch myself thinking, maybe they were right. Maybe it would be easier to just sign the papers, to sell the land, to let it all go. The fight was draining the life right out of me. It felt like I was fading, becoming a ghost in my own home. One afternoon, unable to look at another legal document, I went up to Samuel's study. I hadn't touched much in there. His books were still on the shelves, his reading glasses still on the desk. It felt preserved, like a piece of history I didn't want to disturb. But the dust was starting to settle, and I knew I couldn't leave it forever. I started with the bookshelves. He had a whole section on Texas history, books I'd given him over the years. As I ran my hand along the spines, my fingers brushed against a book that was slightly out of place. A history of the Texas Hill Country. It was one of his favorites. I pulled it out, and something shifted behind it. A small, dark wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, was tucked into the hollowed-out space in the wall. My heart gave a little thump. This was our spot. Years ago, when we first bought the house, we found this little hiding place. A relic from the original builders. Maybe. We never told the children about it. It was our secret. A place where we'd leave little notes for each other. A silly, romantic thing. I hadn't thought about it in years. I lifted the box out. It was light. The wood was smooth and dark, worn from age. I took it downstairs and sat at the kitchen table, pushing aside the threatening letters from Sterling Holdings. My hands trembled a little as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a small, modern-looking thing. A memory stick. The kind you plug into a computer. There was nothing else. No note. No explanation, with a strange sense of purpose. I walked over to Samuel's old laptop, opened it, and plugged the stick in. A single video file appeared on the screen. I clicked on it, and there he was, Samuel, sitting in his favorite armchair in the study. He looked thinner than I remembered, tired. But his eyes were clear. They were looking right at me. He smiled. A small, sad smile. "Hello, B," he said. His voice was a little raspy, but it was him. It was the voice that had been the soundtrack to my life for 40 years. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I'm gone. And it probably means the children have disappointed you." A lump formed in my throat. I put my hand to my mouth. "I'm sorry, my love," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Forgive me. This will all seem cruel. I know it does. But I had to know." He leaned forward, his voice dropping a little. "I saw the world changing, saw how much value they put on things that shine, on money, on status. I saw the shadow of Sterling Holdings getting longer and longer, and I saw how it was pulling David in. I saw the fear in Lena's eyes about her debts, and the worry in Michael's about his son. I saw it all. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. "This will," he said, and he took a deep breath. "This will wasn't a punishment, B. It was a question. I had to ask them one last time. I had to know where their hearts truly belong. Would they choose you, our history, the land that fed us, or would they choose the easy money?" He looked away from the camera for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. I bet the answer on you. Bia, I put all my faith in you. Because you, my love, you have always known the difference between price and value. You are the only one I could trust to see this through. To be the guardian of this legacy. The video ended. The screen went black. But I could still see his eyes. I sat there for a long time. The sound of my own breathing filling the quiet room. The letters from the lawyers seemed small now. Insignificant. The weight on my chest had lifted. I was not alone. He was here. He had never left. He had trusted me. Slowly, I stood up and walked to the hallway mirror. For months, all I had seen in my reflection was a grieving widow, a tired, defeated woman. But now I saw something else. My eyes were red. Yes. But they were clear. The slump in my shoulders was gone. I was not just a widow. I was a guardian. A person entrusted with a mission. Samuel had asked a question, and I was going to be the answer. The ripple effect. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't feel tired. I felt clear. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I had to do. Samuel had entrusted me with a legacy, and I wasn't just going to defend it. I was going to understand it. As a history teacher, I knew that every battle is won first with knowledge. I spent the next 2 days in Samuel's study. But this time, I wasn't just dusting. I was digging. I went through his old ledgers, his maps, his meticulously kept journals about rainfall and soil quality. And I started to see the bigger picture. Sterling Holdings wasn't just after my land. They were after the whole valley. Their strategy was simple. Quietly, one by one, they were making offers to the small farms and ranches that bordered Black Creek, pressuring the old folks, the ones struggling with debt or drought. They were trying to pick us off before we even knew we were in a fight together. My first visit was to see Hank Miller. His ranch was just up the road from the Black Creek parcel. Hank was a third-generation rancher, a man whose skin was as tough and cracked as the land he worked. He was a white man in his 70s, known for being stubborn and not much for talking, especially to people he didn't know well. I found him out by his barn, mending a fence post. He watched me walk up. His eyes narrowed under the brim of his dusty cowboy hat. He didn't say a word, just kept working. "Mr. Miller," I began, my voice steady. "I'm Beatrice Holloway." "Samuel's wife?" He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. I didn't talk to him about lawsuits or corporations. I knew that wasn't his language. I talked about the land. "Samuel always said your fences were the straightest in the county." I told him. He said, "You could read the land like a book." He used to watch the way the creek flowed after a hard rain. And he said it always turns sharp right where your property line starts. Hank stopped working. He turned to look at me. Really look at me. For the first time. Samuel said that he asked, his voice gravelly. "He did." I said. "He respected this land. And he respected the people who took care of it." I paused, letting the silence settle between us. "I got a letter last week from a company called Sterling Holdings. I have a feeling you might have gotten one too." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Once. They want the water," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. They think old folks like us are too tired to fight. "Are we?" I asked, my voice quiet. He picked up his hammer again, but he didn't swing it. He just looked out over the rolling hills, the same hills his father and grandfather had looked out on. "My daddy always said," he drawled, "you don't sell the well just 'cause you're thirsty." That was all he said. But it was enough. My next visit was to the Garcia family. Their farm was on the other side of the creek. They had been working that land for 4 generations, ever since their great-grandparents came here from Mexico. I found Mrs. Garcia in her garden, her hands covered in rich, dark soil. She was surrounded by tomato vines and rows of peppers. I told her my story. About the will, about Charlotte's laugh, about the letters. She listened patiently, wiping her hands on her apron. When I was finished, she nodded. "Sigh," she said softly. "They came to us too. A young man in a fancy suit. He offered us more money than we've ever seen. He said our neighbors were selling. He said we would be foolish to be the last ones left. The classic tactic: divide and conquer. Make everyone feel isolated. Make them feel like they're the only ones saying no. He was lying. I said, Hank Miller isn't selling. Mrs. Garcia's eyes, dark and kind, searched my face. And you, Senora Holloway, you are not selling either. No. I said, I'm not. A week later, we held a meeting. Not in a lawyer's office, but in the basement of the local community church. It was a simple room with folding chairs and a pot of lukewarm coffee. About 15 people showed up. Hank Miller was there. The Garcia family was there. There were black families and white families and Hispanic families. People who had lived side by side for decades but maybe never really talked. At first, the room was full of suspicion. People were guarded, afraid to say too much. Then I stood up. I didn't have a map or a chart. I just had my story. And Samuel's. I told them everything. I told them about the will. I told them about Samuel's journals, about his secret plan to protect the water, not just for us, but for everyone. Then Hank Miller stood up. My family's been here since this was just dust and rock, he said. We ain't leaving now. Then, Mr. Garcia stood up. This land has fed my children, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It is not for sale. One by one, they all stood up. The fear in the room was replaced by something else. A quiet strength. A shared resolve. We weren't just a scattered collection of neighbors anymore. We were an alliance. The Black Creek Water Protective Alliance. It sounded grander than it was. We were just a handful of old farmers and ranchers. We didn't have much money, but we had history on our side. And we had each other. That evening, I stood on my porch, watching the last light of the day paint the hills in shades of purple and gold. I was still alone, but I didn't feel lonely. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Real hope. We had a long fight ahead of us. But now, we were ready. The moral dilemma. There's a different kind of strength that comes from knowing you're not fighting for yourself anymore. It's a cleaner strength. Sharper. The Black Creek Water Alliance, as we started calling ourselves, was small. Just a handful of us. There was me, the Garcias from down the road, old Mr. Miller who owned the pecan orchard, and a few others. We were a patchwork quilt of folks who didn't have much in common, except for the land beneath our feet and the enemy at our gates, our new lawyer. A young, fiery woman named Ms. Chen, who specialized in environmental law, told us we needed more than just history and heart on our side. We needed science. We needed facts. So we pooled our money. It wasn't much. Some of us sold a calf. Others dipped into savings meant for a grandchild's college fund. We hired a hydrologist, a man named Dr. Miles, to conduct an independent study of the Black Creek parcel and the aquifer that lay beneath it. For weeks, there was a sense of purpose in the air, a feeling of forward motion. We would meet at the community library, spreading out maps and documents on the long tables. I felt like the teacher I used to be, explaining historical water treaties while Mr. Garcia explained crop rotation. We were a team. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The day Dr. Miles was ready to present his findings, we all gathered in my living room. The report was thick, bound in a blue cover. It felt heavy in my hands. Dr. Miles was a quiet man with kind eyes. He didn't use fancy legal words. He just spoke the truth of the earth. Well, Mrs. Holloway, he began, your late husband was a very wise man. The water rights associated with your property are substantial. He explained the science. Words like recharge rates and karst topography. He showed us charts filled with numbers and flowing blue lines that looked like the veins of some great, sleeping creature. He confirmed everything Mr. Finch had told me, and more. The water under my land was not just a resource. It was the lifeblood of the entire valley. Its monetary value was staggering. More than enough to make every single one of us in that room rich beyond our wildest dreams. A wave of relief washed over the room. Mr. Miller let out a low whistle. Mrs. berated. Garcia squeezed her husband's hand. We had it. The proof. The weapon we needed to win. But then, Dr. Miles turned to the next page of his report. His expression grew somber. But there's another side to this, he said, his voice quiet. Sterling Holdings doesn't just want to use the water. Their proposal, it's what we call maximum extraction. He showed us another set of charts. These ones were not blue. They were filled with angry red lines that plunged downwards. He explained what it meant. Dry wells. Dead oaks. The creek itself, Black Creek, would be nothing more than a dusty scar on the landscape within 10 years. He pointed to a section detailing land subsidence. The very ground we were sitting on could begin to sink. You can win this lawsuit. Mrs. Holloway, Dr. Miles said, looking directly at me. His kind eyes were now filled with a heavy sadness. You can become one of the wealthiest women in Texas. But the price is that this valley will never be the same again. You'll be selling its future. The hope in the room evaporated. It was replaced by a thick, complicated silence. I looked at the faces around me. I saw the same conflict in their eyes that I felt in my own heart. Mr. Miller was the first to speak. His voice was rough. Sterling is offering to buy me out, he said, not looking at anyone. A lot of money. More than my pecans have made me in a lifetime. Enough to finally fix my roof. Enough to stop worrying. Mrs. Now, Garcia spoke next, her voice trembling. Our son, he wants to go to A&M. We don't know how we're going to pay for it. This money, it would change everything for him. I listened. I understood. This wasn't greed talking. It was exhaustion. It was the voice of good people who had been struggling for too long. The money Sterling was offering was a lifeboat, and I was asking them to stay on a sinking ship out of principle. The fight was no longer simple. It was no longer about me versus my children, or us versus a faceless corporation. It was now about the immediate needs of my friends versus the long-term life of the land. Samuel's words came back to me. The land and the water never lie. They don't. They just state the facts. The choice is left to us. After everyone had gone, I sat alone in my living room. The report lay on the coffee table, its blue cover looking innocent. I had fought so hard to protect my husband's legacy. But what was that legacy? Truly, was it the monetary value hidden beneath the earth, or was it the life that flourished on its surface? I could win. I could take the money and ensure that every one of my allies was comfortable for the rest of their days. I could give my own children the financial security they seemed to crave so desperately. Or I could protect the water, protect the future. And in doing so, I might lose the very people who had stood by my side. I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. It was a heavier burden than any legal battle. This was a moral dilemma, a test. And I realized, with a deep and aching certainty, that this was the true inheritance Samuel had left me. Not a piece of land, but a choice. The double agent. The days following that meeting with the Alliance were hard. The weight of that hydrogeologist's report settled on our little community like a slow, creeping frost. Hope is a fragile thing. When it's tied to the promise of money, it can turn bitter overnight. I saw it in the eyes of my neighbors. Mr. Henderson, whose debts were piling up, stopped making eye contact with me at the grocery store. Mrs. Garcia told me, her voice heavy with apology, that Sterling Holdings had made her family another offer. A bigger one. The unity we had built felt like it was fraying at the edges. I felt that old exhaustion creeping back in, that familiar sense of being alone against a rising tide. I spent my evenings reading, not just the legal paper, but Samuel's history books, trying to find stories of people who had faced impossible odds, trying to borrow their strength. One night, long after midnight, the phone rang. The sound sliced through the quiet house, jarring and loud. My first thought was that something had happened to one of my neighbors. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for the receiver in the dark. "Hello," I said, my voice thick with sleep. "Mom." The voice was a whisper. So quiet I almost didn't recognize it. Michael, I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Michael, what is it? Is your son all right?" "He's fine, Mom." "He's fine," he whispered, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Listen, I can't talk for long. I'm using a payphone." A payphone. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had used a payphone. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "What's wrong?" I asked. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of a truck rumbling past on a highway somewhere. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't be a part of this." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "I went to a dinner with David and Charlotte tonight," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "At her father's club. They thought I was on their side. They were celebrating, talking about the case." He took a shaky breath. "Mom, they've been lying. About everything." I held the phone tighter. My knuckles were white. "That report, the one you have," he said. "They have their own, a secret one. It's even worse than yours, Mom. It says the aquifer could be permanently damaged. Contaminated, not in a decade. In 5 years." The room felt cold. I pulled Samuel's old quilt tighter around my shoulders. "They're going to bury it," Michael whispered frantically. "They paid off a county commissioner, a man named Reynolds. I heard them talking about it. A campaign donation, they called it, to make sure their version of the report is the only one the court sees." My mind was reeling. A secret report. A bribe. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a crime. "Michael," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "why are you telling me this?" "Because," he stopped. I heard him swallow hard. "Because when I was sitting there, listening to them toast with their expensive champagne, all I could think about was Dad. And you. And what you taught us." I looked at David. And he looked like a stranger. "I don't want to become a stranger, Mom." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Okay, Michael. What can you do?" I think I can get a copy of it," he said. "The real report? It's on a server. David gave me some access for a project. He trusts me. He's a fool to trust me, but he does." "Michael?" "No," I said immediately. "That's too dangerous. They'll know it was you." "They won't," he insisted. "I can cover my tracks." "But Mom, you have to be careful. They're watching you. They're watching the Garcias. They have people, private investigators. They think you're just a sentimental old woman, but they aren't taking any chances. They will do anything to win. Anything." The word hung in the air between us. It was a promise and a threat. "Send me what you find," I said, my voice now firm. "Send it to a new email address. I'll create one. Don't call me from your phone again." "I will." "Mom," he said, "I'm so sorry. Just be safe, Michael," I whispered. "Please. Just be safe." He hung up. I sat in the darkness, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The moon cast a pale light across the bedroom floor. My son. My quiet, lost son. He had made a choice. He had stepped back from the edge. The next morning, I had an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. There was only one attachment. A password-protected document. Michael had sent the password in a separate, coded message to my library card account, a little system he and I had used when he was a boy to share secret. I opened the file, and I read page after page of scientific data, of redacted charts, of internal memos discussing acceptable risks and mitigation of public perception. It was all there. The lies, the conspiracy, the cold, calculated plan to sacrifice our home for their profit. I held the phone in my hand, my heart a mix of fear and a fierce, burning pride. For the first time in months, one of my children had chosen to stand with me. But the cost of that loyalty could be terribly high. If you are still listening to my story, if you have journeyed this far with me, would you do me a kindness, please? Leave a comment below that just says, "I stand with B." It would mean the world to me. Knowing that I have friends walking beside me on this path, your presence is the greatest encouragement you could give me as I prepare to tell you how it all ends. The hearing. The courtroom was cold. Not just the air conditioning, but the atmosphere itself. It felt formal, impersonal. A place where stories like mine were flattened into case numbers and legal precedents. I sat beside Mr. Finch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Behind us, I could feel the presence of the Garcias, the Hendersons, and a dozen other families from our alliance. Their quiet support was a warm weight at my back. Across the aisle sat the opposition. Charlotte, my daughter-in-law, looked perfect, not a hair out of place. Her father, a man whose face was a mask of expensive confidence, sat beside her. And, next to him, was David, my son. He looked pale. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Sterling Holdings went first. Their lead lawyer was slick. He moved with an easy grace, painting a beautiful picture for the judge. A screen lit up with images. Computer-generated pictures of a sparkling golf course, of luxury homes nestled among manicured trees, of a resort that promised jobs, prosperity, the future. He spoke of progress, of economic growth. He made our little piece of hill country sound like a forgotten relic that was holding the entire state of Texas back. As he spoke, he made the Black Creek parcel sound like their property already, a mere formality to be dealt with. I just sat there. I listened. I watched the judge's face, trying to read the unreadable. The lawyer's voice was smooth, persuasive. For a moment, even I felt the pull of his vision, the promise of an easy, prosperous world. Then, he finished. "The defense rests, Your Honor." The judge turned his gaze to our table. "Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Fiver. Finch, Mr. Finch stood up. He was an old man, and he moved slowly. But when he spoke, his voice filled the room. It was not slick. It was steady, like the roots of an old oak tree. He presented our case simply. He talked about Samuel's will, about my legal right as steward of the land. He was calm, methodical. Then he said, "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Beatrice Holloway, would like to address the court directly." A murmur went through the room. The judge raised an eyebrow, but he nodded. "Very well." I stood up. My knees felt weak. I walked to the podium, my sensible shoes making no sound on the marble floor. I looked at the judge. Then I looked out at the room. I saw my neighbors. And I saw my children. Lena and Michael sat at the back, their faces etched with worry. And David was finally looking at me. His expression was a storm of conflict. My voice, when it came out, was a little shaky at first. "Your Honor," I began, "my name is Beatrice Holloway. For 35 years, I was a history teacher. I taught our children that history isn't just about dates and famous names. It's about the land. It's about the water that runs through it. It's about the promises we make to the future." I took a breath, and my voice grew stronger. "The lawyers for Sterling Holdings, they have shown you beautiful pictures. They have spoken of progress, but there is a history to that land they did not show you. A history of families like the Garcias, who have worked that soil for 4 generations. A history of promises, of handshakes over fences, of neighbors helping neighbors through drought and flood." I turned my gaze toward the Sterling Holdings table. They are not just asking for a piece of property, Your Honor. They are asking this court to grant them permission to sell our future for their present-day profit. The slick lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a relevant emotional testimony. It is entirely relevant. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and firm now, the voice of a teacher who would not be interrupted, because they have not been honest about the cost of that profit. Mr. Finch stepped forward. Your Honor, he said, we have evidence that Sterling Holdings has deliberately withheld critical information from this court. Information regarding the catastrophic environmental impact of their proposed project. He placed a document on the judge's bench. It was the report from our hydrogeologist. The Sterling lawyer just smiled. A confident, dismissive little smile. Your Honor, this is a competing analysis. We have our own experts who disagree entirely. I am sure you do. Mr. Finch said calmly. But do your experts know about this? He held up a small digital audio recorder. This is a recording. Your Honor, a recording of Mr. Sterling and his legal team discussing their plan to bury their own internal report and to offer a campaign donation to a county commissioner to ensure that it stays buried. The slick lawyer's smile vanished. Charlotte went rigid in her chair. Her father's face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. Mr. Finch pressed play. The courtroom was dead silent. We all listened to the tinny, secret recording of men planning a crime, planning to poison our land and lie about it. The voice of Charlotte's father was unmistakable, arrogant, dismissive. When it finished, the judge stared down at the Sterling table. His face was like granite, but I wasn't looking at the judge. I was looking at David. My son had his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. Slowly, he looked up. He met my eyes across the courtroom. And in his gaze, I saw the little boy I had raised. The boy who knew right from wrong. I saw him break. He stood up. His own lawyer tried to pull him down, but he shook his head. Your Honor, David said, his voice choked. Your Honor, it's true. Charlotte let out a strangled gasp. It's all true, David said, his voice gaining a desperate strength. He was no longer looking at the judge. He was looking at me. I knew. I knew about the report. I didn't do anything to stop it. I'm sorry. Mom, I am so sorry. The slick lawyer buried his face in his hands. The battle was over. The beautiful, computer-generated images on the screen flickered and went dark, leaving only the cold, hard truth in their place. The reckoning. Walking out of that courthouse felt strange. There was no grand sense of victory. No swell of triumphant music like you see in the movies. There was just the bright, blinding Texas sun and a deep, bone-weary quiet in my soul. I had won. But it felt less like a victory and more like the end of a long, painful fever. The sickness was gone, but I was left weak and changed. The news came in pieces over the next few weeks. Sterling Holdings was under federal investigation. Charlotte's father and Commissioner Reynolds were facing charges. It was all over the local papers. A scandal that unfolded in stark black and white. Charlotte filed for divorce from David before the month was out. I read about it in a small column on page 3. It said the separation was amicable. I imagine it was anything but. My children didn't call. I didn't expect them to. I think we all needed time for the echoes of that courtroom to fade. I spent my days walking the Black Creek parcel, the land I had fought so hard for. I would sit by the stream, listening to the water trickle over the stones, and I would try to figure out what came next. The fight was over, but the work, I was beginning to realize, had just begun. About a month after the verdict, they came to the house. All three of them. They didn't call first. They just appeared on my doorstep one Sunday afternoon, looking like shipwreck survivors. I let them in. We sat in the living room, the same room where we had shared so many holidays, so many birthdays. But now it felt like a room full of strangers. Lena was the first to speak. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy from crying. Mom place, she said. Her voice choked. I am so sorry. I was selfish. And there's no excuse for what I did. Michael sat beside her, nodding. Me too. Mom, he said quietly. I'm ashamed of myself. I almost let them take everything. I looked at them, my two youngest. I could see the sincerity in their tears. But my heart felt numb, like a limb that had been asleep for too long. David said nothing. He sat apart from the others, staring at the floor. He looked hollowed out. He had lost his wife, his reputation, his father-in-law's company. He had lost everything he thought was important. He couldn't even bring himself to look at me. I let the silence sit for a long moment. I didn't rush to comfort them. I didn't say, "It's okay." Because it wasn't. "I hear your words," I said finally, my voice calm and even. It was my teacher's voice. The one I used when I was explaining a difficult, unchangeable fact of history. "And I believe you mean them." Today, I turned my gaze to David. "Look at me." David. Slowly, reluctantly, he lifted his head. His eyes were filled with a shame so deep it was painful to see. "I'm not interested in your apologies," I told them, my voice softening just a little. "An apology is a word. It's a sound. It doesn't mend what's been broken. It doesn't undo the sleepless nights, or the fear, or the fact that my own children stood by and watched as I was insulted and threatened." I let that sink in. "Your father's will," I continued, "was a test. And you all failed it. You failed him. And you failed me." Lena started to cry again. A quiet, heartbroken sound. "But," I said, "and this was the hardest part. You are still my children, and I will not turn my back on you. But things cannot go back to the way they were. That family is gone." I stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the yard Samuel had loved so much. "I'm not selling the land," I told them. "I'm not selling the water rights. I'm putting it all into a trust. A foundation. The Black Creek Trust. Its only purpose will be to protect that water, for this community, forever. That is Samuel's real legacy. And it will be mine." I turned back to face them. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. "Forgiveness," I said, "is not a word. It's an action. It's work. If you want to be a part of this family again, if you want to be a part of this legacy, you will have to earn it." What do you want us to do?" Michael asked, his voice hesitant. "I want you to work," I said simply. "Not for me. For the trust. For the people you were so willing to sacrifice. The Garcias need help repairing their fences. The Hendersons' well pump is broken. The community garden needs weeding. I want you to go to them. Offer your hands, not your money. Your time. Your sweat. I want you to learn, in your bones, what it means to be a part of a community. What it means to give without expecting anything in return." I looked at David. "That is the only road back," I told him. "It's a long road, and I don't know where it ends. But it begins tomorrow morning. At the Garcias' farm, 8 o'clock sharp." They didn't argue. They just nodded. There were no more tears. There was only a heavy, sobering understanding. When they left, the house felt quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the lonely silence of grief anymore. It felt clean. Like the air after a thunderstorm. I didn't know if they would show up the next morning. I didn't know if their regret was strong enough to survive a day of hard labor under the hot Texas sun. I had given them a map, but they had to choose to take the first step, all on their own. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a flicker, a tiny, fragile glimmer of hope. The legacy. A year can feel like a lifetime, or it can feel like a single, quiet breath. For me, it has been both. The Black Creek Community Trust is real now. It's not just a stack of legal papers in Mr. Finch's office. It's a living thing. It's a monthly board meeting in the town library, where farmers sit next to ecologists. It's a new, water-efficient irrigation system for the Henderson farm, paid for by our first grant. It's the sound of clean water flowing where it's needed most. Last spring, we held our first annual Black Creek Festival, right on the edge of the parcel, the land that Charlotte had called worthless. There was barbecue, and music, and children running through the tall prairie grass that has started to grow back along the creek bed. I saw Mrs. Garcia teaching a group of kids how to identify native plants. I saw Mr. Henderson laughing, a deep, genuine laugh I hadn't heard in years. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community, bound together by the water that ran beneath our feet. My children were there, too. They took me at my word. They started showing up. At first, it was awkward, hesitant, but they kept coming back. David, my son, who had once brokered million-dollar deals, spent his weekends in muddy boots, helping the Garcia family mend their fences. He learned how to fix a broken water pump. He learned the names of their children. I watched as the hard, anxious lines around his eyes began to soften. He wasn't chasing success anymore. He was building something real. Lena, my artist, found her purpose. She started a small art program for the local kids, right out of the community hall. She taught them how to paint landscapes of the hill country, how to see the beauty in the land their parents worked so hard to protect. She was using her gifts not for fame, but for connection. Her art, once full of a lonely angst, was now bursting with color and life. And Michael, my quiet Michael, he discovered a passion he never knew he had. He started working with the ecologists from the university, helping them monitor the health of the aquifer. He would take his son out with him, teaching him about the ecosystem, about the delicate balance of life. He was no longer just a father struggling to provide. He was a father passing down a legacy they are rebuilding. Not just fences and pumps, but trust. Slowly, day by day. We don't talk much about what happened. We don't need to. I see it in their action. I see it in the way they look at the land. I see it in the way they look at me. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on the porch of the old house, my house. Now, they insisted I keep it, and I think about all that has passed. And I've come to understand a few things. I realize now that Samuel didn't leave me a property to own. He left me a responsibility to uphold. Perhaps the greatest lesson we can give our children isn't wealth to spend, but values to live by. The task isn't to give them a soft landing, but to teach them how to build something of their own that is worthy and true. My children learned a hard lesson, one that cost them dearly. They learned that a true inheritance isn't what is handed to you when someone is gone. It is what you build with your own hands and your own heart while you are still here to build it. It is the character you forge in the face of your own mistakes. And maybe the biggest lesson for all of us in this fast-moving world is this: in a time filled with promises of quick profits and instant gratification, the things of lasting value are almost always hidden from view. They flow quietly, deep beneath the surface. Like water, you cannot always see it, but it is the one thing that sustains all life. You just have to be patient enough and wise enough to listen for it. I often walk out to the Black Creek parcel in the early morning. When the mist is still rising from the ground, I'll pick up a smooth, gray stone from the creek bed, its surface worn patient by the constant flow of water. I hold it in my hand, and I feel the coolness, the solidity, the history of it all. I am not a grieving widow. I am not a victor in a legal battle. I am Beatrice Holloway. And this is my legacy. Quiet, enduring, and full of life. And that is where we leave Beatrice Holloway, standing on the land she fought so hard for. Her journey makes me ask myself, what is the true value of an inheritance? Is it the money in the bank? Or the character you build? I'm genuinely curious to know what you think. If you were Bea, would you have found it in your heart to offer that path back to your children? Let me know your perspective in the comments. Your insights always give me so much to think about. If Bea's story resonated with you, a simple like helps more than you know. And if you believe someone else needs to hear this, please share it with them. Be sure to subscribe to Dipu Cotter Stories, because our conversations here are just getting started. Until we meet in the next story, take care of yourselves and the legacies you're building every day.